The year is 1574, and the city of Leiden is starving. Spanish troops surround the ancient walls and cut off every supply line from the outside world. Inside the city, the citizens are reduced to boiling leather hides and eating rats to survive the gnawing hunger. Mayor Pieter Adriaansoen van der Werf stands in the town square and offers his own body as food to the desperate mob rather than surrender to the Catholic enemy. Hope seems entirely lost until a rumble is felt deep in the earth. The Dutch rebels have made a desperate gamble by piercing the dikes to flood the land. The ocean rushes in to drown the besiegers and save the rebellion. This dramatic moment was just one episode in a conflict that spanned nearly a century. The 80 Years' War was not merely a local skirmish, but a clash of titans that redefined the map of Europe. It pitted a loose collection of merchant provinces against the global might of the Spanish Empire. At stake was the very soul of the Netherlands and the right to worship freely without fear of the Inquisition. The outcome would determine whether a small republic could rise from the marshes to become a global superpower or be crushed under the heel of an absolute monarch. King Philip II of Spain ruled over an empire where the sun never set. His domain stretched from the Americas to the Philippines and included the wealthy 17 provinces of the Netherlands. Philip was a devout Catholic who viewed himself as the defender of the faith against the rising tide of Protestantism. He ruled from the distant Escorial Palace in Madrid and had little patience for the local traditions or privileges of his Dutch subjects. His goal was to centralize power and enforce religious uniformity at any cost. The Dutch nobility felt increasingly sidelined by Spanish bureaucrats. Tensions reached a breaking point with the spread of Calvinism among the Dutch population. This austere form of Protestantism rejected the hierarchy of the Catholic Church and resonated with the independent spirit of the merchant class. Secret sermons were held in the fields outside city walls, where thousands gathered to hear preachers denounce the idolatry of the established church. The Inquisition hunted these heretics down with ruthless efficiency. Men were burned at the stake, and women were buried alive for possessing forbidden Bibles. The atmosphere was thick with fear and resentment waiting for a spark. That spark ignited in the summer of 1566 during the events known as the Iconoclastic Fury. Mobs of Protestants stormed Catholic churches across the Low Countries. They smashed stained glass windows and toppled statues of saints while destroying religious paintings. The destruction was a direct challenge to the authority of King Philip and the sanctity of the Catholic Church. What began as a religious protest quickly spiraled into a full-scale political rebellion. The local nobility tried to restore order, but the damage was done. Philip vowed to make the rebels pay for this sacrilege with blood. The king dispatched the Duke of Alba to the Netherlands with a veteran army to crush the dissent. Alba was a hardliner who believed that terror was the only way to ensure obedience. He established the Council of Troubles, which the locals soon renamed the Council of Blood. This tribunal bypassed the local courts and condemned thousands to death without fair trial. The Duke of Alba seized the property of those he executed and imposed heavy taxes to pay for his army. The Netherlands had become a police state under military occupation. Among the first victims of the Duke of Alba were the Count of Egmont and the Count of Hoorn. These two high-ranking nobles had remained loyal to the king, but had advocated for religious tolerance. Alba lured them to a meeting in Brussels where they were arrested and charged with treason. On a sunny day in June 1568, they were beheaded in the Grand Place of Brussels. The shock of their execution reverberated across Europe. If the highest nobles could be killed without mercy, then no one was safe. The time for compromise had passed. One man managed to escape the clutches of the Duke of Alba just in time. William of Orange was the stadtholder of Holland and Zeeland and one of the most powerful men in the provinces. He fled to his ancestral home in Germany to raise an army against the Spanish tyranny. William was not a radical by nature, but a pragmatic statesman who valued unity above all else. He initially fought not against the king himself, but against his evil advisors. However, as the war dragged on, he became the face of the Dutch resistance. William of Orange faced an uphill battle against the professional Spanish tercios. His first invasion attempts were disasters that drained his personal fortune. The mercenaries he hired were often undisciplined and melted away when the money ran out. Yet William persisted with a stubborn determination that earned him the nickname William the Silent. He was a master of diplomacy and propaganda who worked tirelessly to secure alliances with France and England. He knew that the Dutch could not win a conventional war against Spain and needed to use their unique geography. The turning point came from an unlikely source known as the Sea Beggars. These were a motley crew of pirates and privateers who had been expelled from English ports. In April 1572, they accidentally captured the port city of Brielle when high winds forced them to seek shelter. The Spanish garrison was absent, and the Sea Beggars seized the town in the name of the Prince of Orange. This victory electrified the population. For the first time, the rebels held a fortified city on Dutch soil. The revolt now had a foothold. Inspired by the capture of Brielle, other cities in Holland and Zeeland threw open their gates to the rebels. The revolt spread like wildfire across the northern provinces. Calvinists took control of town councils and purged Catholic officials from power. The Duke of Alba responded with characteristic brutality. His troops sacked the city of Mechelen and massacred its inhabitants as a warning to others. The war descended into a cycle of atrocities where neither side showed mercy. The Spanish army was a terrifying machine of war that seemed unstoppable. The Spanish laid siege to the city of Haarlem in the winter of 1572. The citizens of Haarlem fought back with desperate courage on the ice and snow. Women and children joined the defense by repairing walls and pouring boiling oil on the attackers. The siege lasted for 7 months until famine forced the city to surrender. The Spanish executed the entire garrison and many leading citizens. It was a Pyrrhic victory for Spain that cost them thousands of men and emptied their treasury. The Dutch learned that surrender meant death. The momentum shifted at the Siege of Alkmaar in 1573. The Spanish surrounded the city and breached the walls, but the defenders refused to yield. The Dutch leadership ordered the dikes to be cut and flooded the surrounding fields. The Spanish troops found themselves wading through rising waters and mud while being fired upon from the walls. Fearing that their heavy artillery would be lost in the mire, the Spanish commander broke the siege and retreated. It was the first time the mighty Spanish army had been forced to withdraw by the rebels. Following the relief of Leiden, the provinces of Holland and Zeeland united under the leadership of William of Orange. They formalized their alliance and created a government that could levy taxes and maintain a standing army. The Spanish position weakened further when the Spanish government declared bankruptcy in 1575. The unpaid Spanish soldiers mutinied and turned on the very people they were supposed to rule. They rampaged through the countryside, looting and burning villages in a blind fury. The chaos alienated even the Catholic loyalists in the south. The worst atrocity occurred in Antwerp in 1576 during the event known as the Spanish Fury. Mutinous Spanish troops stormed the wealthy city and killed thousands of civilians over 3 days of terror. They burned down the town hall and stole millions in gold and goods. The massacre shocked the entire Netherlands and drove the southern provinces into the arms of the rebels. In the pacification of Ghent, the northern and southern provinces agreed to unite to expel the Spanish mutineers. It seemed that a united Netherlands was finally within reach. However, the unity was fragile and short-lived. The deep religious divide between the Calvinist North and the Catholic South proved impossible to bridge. The new Spanish governor, Alexander Farnese, the Duke of Parma, was a brilliant diplomat and general. He played on the fears of the Catholic nobility in the South, who were alarmed by the radicalism of the Calvinists. Farnese offered them security and the restoration of their privileges in exchange for loyalty to the king. One by one, the southern provinces returned to the Spanish fold. The northern provinces responded by signing the Union of Utrecht in 1579. This treaty established a military alliance that would become the foundation of the Dutch Republic. It guaranteed freedom of conscience, but effectively established a Protestant state. The lines were now drawn between a rebel north and a loyalist south. The dream of a unified Netherlands encompassing all 17 provinces was dead. The war transformed into a struggle for the survival of the Northern Union against the encroaching Spanish forces. In 1581, the States General of the Northern Provinces took the unprecedented step of issuing the Act of Abjuration. This document formally deposed Philip II as their sovereign. It argued that a king who oppresses his subjects and violates their rights is no longer a king but a tyrant. The Dutch declared that they had the right to choose a new leader who would respect their liberties. This was a revolutionary concept that predated the American Declaration of Independence by nearly 2 centuries. Philip II responded by placing a bounty on the head of William of Orange. He offered a massive reward and a pardon for any crime to anyone who could assassinate the rebel leader. In July 1584, a fanatical Catholic named Balthazar Gerard infiltrated the Prinsenhof in Delft. He shot William in the chest at close range. William of Orange died moments later, becoming the first head of state in history to be assassinated with a handgun. The father of the fatherland was dead, and the rebellion seemed leaderless. The death of William plunged the rebels into a crisis. The Spanish armies under the Duke of Parma were advancing relentlessly and capturing city after city. Antwerp fell in 1585 after a long siege, and the Dutch cause looked hopeless. In desperation, the States General offered sovereignty to Queen Elizabeth of England. She declined the crown but agreed to send troops and money to support the Dutch. This intervention brought England into open war with Spain and provided a lifeline for the struggling republic. The command of the Dutch army eventually passed to the son of William, named Maurice of Nassau. Maurice was a military genius who revolutionized warfare in Europe. He studied ancient Roman texts to develop new tactics involving drilling and discipline. He standardized the size of units and the caliber of weapons. Under his leadership, the Dutch army became a professional fighting force, capable of meeting the Spanish in the open field. Maurice began a systematic campaign to recapture the cities lost to the Duke of Parma. The fate of the Netherlands was inadvertently saved by the hubris of Philip II. Instead of focusing his resources on crushing the Dutch, he launched the Spanish Armada against England in 1588. The failure of the Armada was a catastrophic blow to Spanish naval power and prestige. It forced the Duke of Parma to divert his troops to invade France, which gave Maurice of Nassau the breathing room he needed. The pressure on the Dutch borders eased as Spain became entangled in conflicts on multiple fronts. During the decade known as the 10 Glory Years from 1590 to 1600, Maurice of Nassau went on the offensive. He used his mobile artillery and combat engineers to besiege Spanish-held towns with scientific precision. He captured Breda and Zutphen and Deventer and Nijmegen. The Dutch secured the great rivers that served as natural barriers for the Republic. By the turn of the century, the borders of the modern Netherlands were largely established. The Republic had survived its infancy and was growing into a formidable power. While the armies fought on land, the Dutch merchants were conquering the seas. Cut off from Portuguese spice markets by the Spanish crown, the Dutch decided to sail to the East Indies themselves. In 1602, they founded the Dutch East India Company, or VOC. This was the first multinational corporation in the world, and it was granted a monopoly on trade with Asia. The VOC built a massive fleet that displaced the Portuguese and established a global trading empire. The profits from the spice trade fueled the Dutch war effort. The war exhausted both sides and led to a stalemate. In 1609, Spain and the Dutch Republic agreed to the 12 Years' Truce. It was a de facto recognition of Dutch independence. For the first time in decades, the guns fell silent. The truce allowed the Dutch economy to boom, but it also unleashed internal religious and political tensions. Without a common enemy, the Dutch turned on each other. A dispute arose between two factions of the Calvinist Church regarding the doctrine of predestination. The religious conflict pitted the stadtholder Maurice of Nassau against the land advocate Johan van Oldenbarnevelt. Oldenbarnevelt was the political architect of the Republic, but he opposed the military ambitions of Maurice. The dispute escalated until Maurice staged a coup and arrested Oldenbarnevelt on trumped-up charges of treason. The 71-year-old statesman was beheaded in The Hague in 1619. It was a dark chapter in the history of the Republic that showed the fragility of its political system. The truce expired in 1621 and the war resumed. By this time, the conflict had merged with the wider 30 Years' War that was ravaging Germany. Spain launched a new offensive under the command of Ambrogio Spinola. He captured the key city of Breda in 1625 after a long siege. The surrender of Breda was immortalized in a famous painting by Diego Velázquez. However, the Spanish victory was short-lived, as they could not sustain the financial burden of the war. The Dutch struck a massive blow against the Spanish treasury in 1628. Admiral Piet Hein captured the Spanish treasure fleet off the coast of Cuba. He brought home millions of guilders in silver and gold, which was enough to fund the Dutch army for months. The capture of the Silver Fleet was a national triumph that is still celebrated in Dutch songs today. It crippled the Spanish ability to pay their troops and forced them to go on the defensive. The new stadtholder Frederick Henry continued the work of his brother Maurice. He was known as the city conqueror for his successful sieges of fortified towns in the south. Frederick Henry created a court in The Hague that rivaled the royal houses of Europe in splendor. He married his son to the daughter of the King of England, which elevated the status of the House of Orange. Under his leadership, the Dutch Republic reached the pinnacle of its power and influence. The final decisive battle of the war took place at sea in 1639. A massive Spanish armada attempted to transport troops to the Netherlands, but was intercepted by Admiral Martin Tromp. In the Battle of the Downs, Tromp annihilated the Spanish fleet in the English Channel. It was the end of Spain as a dominant naval power. The Spanish could no longer reinforce their armies in the Low Countries by sea. The road to peace was finally open. Negotiations for a final peace treaty began in the German region of Westphalia in 1646. The diplomats argued over borders and religion and trade rights for 2 years. Spain finally accepted the reality that the northern Netherlands were lost forever. On January 30th, 1648, the Peace of Munster was signed. Spain formally recognized the Dutch Republic as a sovereign and independent state. The 80 Years' War had finally come to an end. The consequences of the war were profound for both nations. Spain began a long period of decline and lost its status as the hegemon of Europe. The Dutch Republic emerged as one of the richest and most powerful nations on earth. It became a haven for refugees and intellectuals and artists. The principle of religious tolerance, although imperfect, became a cornerstone of Dutch society. The Republic proved that a government based on the consent of the governed could prosper. This era of prosperity became known as the Dutch Golden Age. Rembrandt and Vermeer painted masterpieces that captured the light and spirit of the time. Dutch scientists like Christian Huygens and Antony van Leeuwenhoek made groundbreaking discoveries in optics and biology. Dutch ships carried goods to every corner of the globe, from the Hudson River in North America to the islands of Japan. The tiny republic punched far above its weight class on the world stage. The legacy of the Dutch Revolt extended far beyond the borders of the Netherlands. The act of abjuration influenced the political thought of John Locke and Thomas Jefferson. The idea that people have a right to resist tyranny became a fundamental principle of modern democracy. The federal structure of the Dutch Republic served as a model for the United States Constitution. The struggle of the Dutch rebels inspired future generations to fight for their own freedom. Today, the scars of the 80 Years' War can still be seen in the fortified cities and ancient battlefields of the Netherlands. The division between the Netherlands and Belgium is a direct result of the split between the rebel North and the loyalist South. But the most enduring monument is the Dutch nation itself. It was forged in the fire of conflict and tempered by the sea. The resilience and independence of the Dutch people remain a testament to their long struggle for liberty.